Adding a vignette to your photos gives them that little something extra. It transforms an ordinary photo into a captivating image. Unfortunately, a lot of people overdo it with vignettes. In this video, I will show you how to make a subtle vignette in Photoshop that does exactly what a vignette should while being hardly there at all. Don't go away. Hi, I'm Barry from Photographer's Freedom. I simplify DSLR and mirrorless photography, helping you gain the freedom to capture nature with ease. The purpose of a vignette is to guide your viewer's eye to the subject of your photograph. Our eyes will naturally look towards the brightest part of a photo, which makes sense when you think about it. If you were in a dark tunnel, you wouldn't look at the darkness of the walls around you, you'd be fixated on that light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, a lot of photographers overdo vignettes. They make them far too dark. When a vignette is as dark as the one in this photo, I find it distracts me from looking at the subject. My eye is drawn to the subject, but then I notice the dark corners in my peripheral vision, which is distracting. I use vignettes in a much subtler way that draws the viewer's eye in without being distracting. You hardly notice the vignette at all. Let's go over to the computer and I'll show you how to do this. I learnt this technique from Aaron Nace from Flern, and it's so easy to do. I'm using this image I took of two adorable red-backed fairy wrens. This is a perfect example of an image where you'd want to use a vignette because the area around the birds is full of distractions. There's branches, there's leaves and vines that are taking our eye away from the two birds in the center. Adding a vignette around the edges will draw our eye straight towards those birds, making them the hero of this photo. You can choose any image of yours you'd like and follow along. You will notice I've done a couple of things to this image already. I've removed the noise with Topaz Denoise AI, and I've also sharpened the image a little using Unsharp Mask. If you'd like to know how to sharpen an image using Unsharp Mask in Photoshop, I have a video about that. I've linked that in the cards above and in the video description. Make sure you finish watching this video first. I'll remind you about watching that one again at the end of this video. I will take you through creating a selection and making a vignette using a curves adjustment layer. I urge you to watch the next section of this video about how to make the selection. Beyond that, if you're a person who doesn't like sitting through laborious Photoshop how-to videos, I've created a Photoshop Actions pack. That pack can be downloaded via a link in the video description. The first step to adding our vignette is to make a selection using the elliptical marquee tool. You will find that over here on the left. It's the second icon down from the top. If you don't see the elliptical tool, just hover your mouse pointer over the icon, left click and hold, and this menu will pop out where you can select the elliptical marquee tool. With the elliptical marquee tool selected, we can now make a selection. Left click and drag where you want your selection to be. If you need to move it while selecting, you can press the space bar and click and drag it around to wherever you want. To make a perfect circle, I'll just start my selection again. To make the perfect circle, just press and hold Shift as you click and drag. That will make a perfect circle. You can also, while holding Shift, press and hold the space bar and to move it around to wherever you like. Don't release the Shift key until you are happy with the placement of your selection, as it will turn back into an ellipse. If it does, you can always press Shift again to go back to the perfect circle. When you're happy with your selection, release the mouse button and it will stay in place. To delete any selection, press Ctrl or Command D and then you can start over again. Okay, I'll just make a selection again and maybe move it across there a bit. Now you'll notice that I've selected not just the birds but a fair amount of area around them. The reason for that will be apparent later in the video. If you need to move the selection after placing it, move your cursor inside the selection, you can see it turns to that arrow with the little rectangle symbol there, and you can left click and drag it to move it to wherever you need it to be. If you have snap turned on inside the view menu up the top here, you'll see snap is checked. When you move the selection, it will snap to the center of the document. You can see that it kind of jumps in there and it becomes a little bit sticky. You sort of have to move the mouse a little bit more to get it to come away from the center. Now that's fine if you want the selection in the center of the canvas. For this image, however, I don't want that because it leaves the bird's bodies and their eye a little off center. I want them in the center of the vignette, as that is where I want my viewer's eye to look. If you need to change the size of your selection, go up to the select menu up the top here and down to transform selection. If you left click on that, you can see there is now a box around the selection and you can alter it as you choose. You can also do this by right clicking inside the selection and choosing transform selection from that menu there. If you left click and drag any of these handles on the square, that changes the size of the selection. You can see how it changes relative to the handle opposite of where you click and drag. If I click on the bottom right hand corner, it will resize it relative to the top left hand corner. It's anchored in that top left hand corner. If you want to resize it in place, hold Alt or Option as you click and drag. When you're satisfied with the size and placement, click this check mark up here to OK the changes. Now that we have our selection, the next step is to create a curves adjustment layer. There are three ways we can do this. We can click on curves here in the adjustments panel. That will create a curves adjustment layer. I'll just Control Z to undo that. If you don't see the adjustments panel, come up here to the window menu and make sure adjustments is checked there. That's the easiest way to create a curves adjustment layer. You can also move the cursor down here to this little circle icon down the bottom, left click that and select curves. That will also create a curves adjustment layer. Or, undo that, you can come up here to the layer menu at the top left, click on that, down to new adjustment layer, curves. That will bring up this dialog box where you can name it Vignette. Click OK, and that creates your curves adjustment layer too. If for any reason you don't see this curves adjustment window here, you can just come down here to your layer and double click on this little graph icon and that will bring it up. In the curves adjustment graph here, the way we can adjust this is simply by clicking on the center of the graph. We'll create that little handle there and I can drag it down to make things darker or up to make things lighter. Now you'll notice that the effect is happening in the center of the image, which is of course not what we want. We want it around the edges. The reason for that is if I alt click on our layer mask thumbnail down there, you can see that the center of the mask is white. That means the effect will be visible in that area. Around the edges where it's black, the effect will not be visible. So we have to invert that because we want the effect visible around the edges. The way we do this is by making sure that the layer thumbnail is selected, so it's got that white rectangle around it, and then we press Control or Command I, and you can see it's now flipped and the curves adjustment is showing on the outside instead of the center. So now you can see here this is changed to the masks view, so if I just click the graph again, I'll get my graph back, and then I can adjust the darkness here. It's probably a little bit strong, so I'm going to back it up to about there. When I'm satisfied, I just close the window there. Now at the moment this looks a little bit ridiculous because we can see the outline of the vignette, so we can't leave it like that. What we need to do is apply a blur to the layer mask to make it blend seamlessly towards the edges of the canvas. The way we do this is by first making sure the mask is selected by clicking on the layer mask icon there, making sure it's got the white rectangle around it. Come up to the filter menu to blur, Gaussian blur, click that. Now it may not make much of a difference at first, it does for me because I have a higher value in the radius here. Yours may have something like 2 in there, so it'll kind of look like that, not make much of a difference. So I use the value of 366 pixels because I find that makes it look nice and seamless and it's good, but it may depend on the type of image. So play around with higher values until you can't see the edges of the vignette and it blends seamlessly. Once you're satisfied, just click OK. Right now you might be sitting staring at the screen going, it doesn't look any different. But if I turn off the layer, you'll see it creates quite a difference around the edges of the image, and it really does draw your eye right to the center. If you want to make it darker or lighter, you can double click on the little graph icon down here on the layer. That will bring up your curves graph and you can darken it or lighten it to your liking. I will undo that. Oops, I've undone the Gaussian blur. We'll do that again. You can also change the brightness of the vignette by coming here to the opacity of the layer and just lowering that down. You'll see that makes it lighter or darker. If you wanted to, I'm going to leave it at 100% because I think it's nice. Now, this can be enough for some images, but in some cases I find that I also want to brighten the center of the image a little bit more just to make the subject pop out a bit more. Now we can do this by creating a reverse of the vignette layer. And there are 2 ways we can do this. So firstly, we can right click on the layer and select duplicate layer, and that will make a second copy which we can name reverse vignette and click OK. So there we have our reverse layer. Now, or you can click and left click and drag the icon down to this plus icon at the bottom and release your mouse, and that creates a copy of your layer as well. And then to rename that, you double click on the name and just rename it there. Reverse vignette. Now at the moment it's applying the vignette around the edges just like our original vignette layer, because you can see the masks are exactly the same. They're both got the white around the edges, meaning the effect is visible at the edges and not so much in the middle. Now we need to reverse that. So the way we do that is just like before, by making sure that the layer mask is selected on our reverse vignette layer and clicking Control or Command I. And you can see that has now reversed our mask. We have a black edge, meaning the effect will not be visible there, and a white in the center, which means it's visible in the center. If I alt click the layer mask thumbnail there again, so if I turn this on and off, you can see it's actually darkening the edges because we haven't changed the curves graph yet. So double click on the little graph icon to bring up your curves adjustment window and click the little handle and drag it up to make the center of the image brighter. Now you don't want to go too far because obviously that looks stupid, so just be very subtle with this. If you want to check what it looks like before and after, just click the little eyeball icon here, that turns it off, turns it on. I think that's kind of nice. It's a very subtle brightness. And if I turn off both of these layers here, so this is before the vignette, and you can see the edges of the image are quite bright. Your eye kind of dances all over the place looking towards the edges and stuff. If you turn it on, boom, your eye goes straight into those birds. If you're having trouble seeing the effect of your vignette with the image this large. What you can do is make it smaller so it's tiny little thumbnail size. And this helps you to visualize the vignette a lot better. So we turn it off, turn it back on. Now you can do the resizing there by using the scroll wheel on your mouse, or by using Control or Command plus or minus on your keyboard. Minus makes it smaller, obviously. Plus makes it bigger while you're holding Control. So that can just help you to visualize it a bit better. Makes it kind of easier to see the effect of the vignette. With some images, you may be left with brighter or darker areas around the edges of the canvas that sort of draw your eye away from your subject. Like with this image here, you can see up in this top right hand corner there's this limb that's lit here, makes it a bit brighter. In fact, this whole right hand side is a lot brighter than this over here, which is kind of shadowy and dark. So what I want to do is even it out so your eye is not drawn a little bit across to the right to look at whatever's brightly shining up in that top corner. The way we do this is with dodge and burn layers. Now, to dodge and burn in Photoshop means to lighten, dodge, or darken, burn. So dodge lightens, burn darkens. The way we create a dodge or burn layer is by making sure that our top layer is selected, and we press Control or Command Shift N, and that brings up this new layer dialog box. We can name our new layer, I'm going to burn, so I'm going to call it burn, and then we click on the mode here of the layer and go down to the overlay and select that. And also there's this checkbox at the bottom that says fill with overlay neutral color 50% gray. We want to tick that, and then we can press OK, and that will create our dodge and burn layer, which currently is invisible because it's 50% gray. In order to burn, we need to make sure that over here on our color swatches that we have the foreground color set to black. And if you don't see, if these are not black and white, you can click this little icon here that will change them back to black and white. Like if I, for example, select red here, so you can see now I've got red in the foreground. To set them back to black and white, click that little icon there. And if you have white in the front, you can just click these little two arrows to change between white and black. Or you can also do that by pressing X on your keyboard. You'll see that changes them too. So we're going to burn. In order to do this, we need to use the brush. So press B on your keyboard. That will bring up the brush. The most important thing when dodging and burning is to make sure your brush does not have a high opacity or high flow. So we're going to change the opacity down to about 10%. 11 will do. And the flow down to around 10% as well. This is going to make sure that we don't apply too much of the effect at one time. To resize the brush, we can press Alt and right click, drag to the right, that'll make it bigger. Make sure the hardness of your brush is also 0%. You can do this by Alt right clicking and dragging your mouse forward or back. That dragging it down towards the bottom of the screen makes it harder. Up to the top makes it the hardness less. Release that. Now we have our brush, opacity 11, flow 10. Our foreground color is black. Now I can just left click and drag to burn those edges that I thought were a little bit bright. So you can see it's barely noticeable as I'm doing it, but if I turn the layer off and on, you can see that's making a big difference, especially to that brighter edge of the limb up here in the top corner. I might just burn that a little bit more, maybe down in here a little bit. Okay, so without that layer and with it. So it's really brought down that area in there and made it a little less obvious. If I just, I'll shift click all of my layers here and press Control G to group them. And if I turn it, I'll just make the image smaller. If I just turn it off and on, you can see the before and after there. So that's before our vignette and our burn layer, and then this is after. It's very subtle, but it really does make your eye go straight to the center where those birds are, which is what we want our viewer to do. Now, of course, to create a If you wanted to dodge somewhere or make an area brighter, make sure that your foreground color is white. Of course, create a new layer. So we can go Control Shift N, call it dodge, and then again, overlay, fill with 50% gray. Boom, we now have a dodge layer. Foreground color is white. I can draw in here to lighten these areas over here if I wanted to. Not that I do, but just for the sake of this tutorial. Now if I turn that off, you can see it's brightened that area a little bit there, but I like it darker, so I'm just going to delete that layer. So again, before, after, it's very subtle, but it's beautiful. Remember to download the Photoshop Actions pack I've done up for you. That'll help you do all of this so much faster. Inside of that pack, you will get the subtle vignette, a reverse vignette, a burn with brush, and a dodge with brush layer, and they are all set up ready to go for you. The only thing the subtle vignette and reverse vignette layers won't do for you is make your selection, of course. So you have to make a selection first. I'll show you in a second how they work. Also, you will get a custom dodge and burn brush here, which I've made up for you, which if I click on that, that just sets your opacity to 10% and your flow to 10% so that you're ready to create those dodge and burn layers. I'll just delete this layer here and we will make a selection around the birds just quickly there. So to use this subtle vignette layer, just come up here, select it, press play, and you can see, bam, it's done the vignette for you. It's all ready to go. If you need to adjust the opacity, you can double click your curves graph there or change the opacity on your layer there. Then if you want a reverse vignette, just select it, click play, does the reverse vignette for you. Same thing again, you can change your brightness of it by double clicking the layer icon, the curves icon there. Now if you want to burn certain areas, just click the burn with brush, press play, that creates the burn layer. It also puts your foreground color to black. So you have to be careful of this, because if I also select a dodge with brush layer and press play, you can see it's changed the foreground color to white. And now your background color is also white. So after using these, make sure to reset your foreground and background swatches there by just clicking the little icon. So that's all included in the pack for you. Link is in the video description. Now you can go and watch this video. That is the sharpening in Photoshop video I mentioned earlier. In that video, you will learn 2 ways to sharpen your images in Photoshop. Until next time, I'm Barry from Photographer's Freedom. Get out there, take some wicked shots. I'll see you soon.